A black girl crashes in with a white baby, points at the groom, and says, "That's my dad." The room freezes. He stammers, "Wait, comment where you're watching from. Take a breath and enjoy the story." The Hford Gardens estate glowed with 1,000 lights as the wedding ceremony reached its climax. Alexander Prescott, 45 and impossibly handsome in his custom tuxedo, stood at the altar beneath an arch of white roses and crystal chandeliers. His bride, Leah McConnell, 38, radiated in her designer gown, diamonds glittering at her throat. 300 guests held their breath as the officiator spoke the traditional words. "If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The customary silence followed, broken only by the distant fountain and the gentle rustle of silk as guests shifted in their seats. Alexander smiled at Leah, relief washing over his face. After months of planning the most exclusive wedding Boston had seen in decades, they were almost there. Then came the sound of small, determined footsteps. Heads turned, whispers erupted. A child was walking down the center aisle. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Her dark skin contrasted with her simple yellow dress, worn and slightly too small. Her hair was neatly braided with colorful beads that clicked softly as she walked. But what silenced the entire gathering was what she carried. A small bundle wrapped in a pale blue blanket. A baby, fair-skinned, and barely 6 months old. The girl showed no hesitation as 300 pairs of eyes followed her progress. Security personnel stood frozen, uncertain how to respond to a child. She walked straight to Alexander, whose face had drained of all color. "Papa," she said, looking directly into his eyes. Just that one word. Leah's hand flew to her mouth. The officiator stepped back. Alexander Prescott, CEO of Prescott Pharmaceuticals, worth an estimated $400 million, stared at the girl as though she were a ghost. "I'm sorry," the girl continued, her voice small but steady in the shocked silence. "But he won't stop crying. I think he's sick." The baby in her arms began to whimper as if on cue. Alexander remained frozen, looking from the girl to the infant, then to Leah, whose expression had transformed from shock to something much harder. "Security!" Leah snapped, finding her voice first. "Remove this child immediately." 2 men in black suits stepped forward, but Alexander raised his hand, stopping them. "Wait!" His voice was barely audible, but in the silence, everyone heard. He looked directly at the girl, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. "What's your name?" he asked. "Nadia," she answered. "Nadia Wolf. My mama was Anne. She told me to find you if anything happened to her." A tear slipped down her cheek. "She died 3 days ago." Alexander's mother, Mary Prescott, rose from her front row seat. "Alexander, what is the meaning of this?" Her voice was still wrapped in silk. Leah stepped away from him, her expression calculating. "Yes, Alexander," she echoed. "What exactly is the meaning of this?" Alexander Prescott, businessman, philanthropist, Boston's most eligible bachelor until today, looked from his bride to his mother, then back to the girl and the infant in her arms. For the first time in his meticulously planned life, he had no prepared statement, no exit strategy. The baby began to cry in earnest now, a thin wail that echoed through the ornate hall. Without thinking, Alexander reached out and took the bundled infant from Nadia's arms. The child quieted almost instantly. A photographer's camera flashed. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves. "I need to speak with this child," Alexander said finally, in private. "You need to finish our wedding," Leah countered, her voice tight. Alexander looked at her, then at the gathered guests, the elaborate decorations, the waiting officiator. Then back to Nadia, standing alone and small, but somehow stronger than anyone else in the room. "Why now?" he asked her quietly. "Why did you come right at this moment?" Nadia reached into the pocket of her yellow dress and pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. Alexander recognized it immediately. It was the announcement of his engagement to Leah, including the wedding date and location. "This was in Mama's things," Nadia said after she swallowed hard. "The lady at the hospital said they'd take us to foster care, separate homes, probably." Jacob's just a baby. She looked at the infant in Alexander's arms. I promised Mom I'd keep him safe. Alexander felt the weight of the baby. Could it be his son? And saw the determination in the eyes of the girl who claimed to be the daughter he never knew he had. The hushed murmurs of guests grew louder as speculation spread through the crowd. Leah's family huddled together, pointing and whispering. His mother's face had turned to granite. Alexander, Leah said, her voice now dangerously quiet. Send them away and we'll discuss this tomorrow after our wedding. He looked at his bride, beautiful, connected, perfect on paper, and suddenly saw their relationship with painful clarity. The merger-like negotiations for the prenup, her father's company's struggling stock, the convenient timing of her interest in him. I can't, he said, surprising himself. You can't what? Leah demanded. Alexander looked at the baby in his arms, then at Nadia, who stood waiting for his decision with the patience of a child who had already endured too much. I can't send them away, he said. Then, more firmly, I won't. As the words left his mouth, Nadia's face relaxed slightly. But before Alexander could say anything else, the grand doors at the back of the hall burst open. A woman in a government-issued pantsuit walked in, flanked by a police officer. I'm Lucy Martinez from Child Protective Services, she announced. I'm looking for Nadia Wolf and Jacob Wolf. They were reported missing from Memorial Hospital 3 hours ago. Nadia's eyes widened with terror and she grabbed Alexander's arm. Don't let them take us, she whispered. Please, Mama said you'd help us. Alexander looked from the approaching social worker to the girl clinging to him, then to the baby in his arms. In that moment, he realized that whatever decision he made next would irreversibly change his life forever. Mr. Prescott, the CPS worker approached, eyeing the tableau with professional suspicion. I need to speak with you about these children. Alexander felt 100 eyes boring into him. In the front row, his mother had risen from her seat, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Leah stood frozen beside him, her perfect day shattered. I'm their father, Alexander heard himself say. The words emerged before he could analyze them, driven by something deeper than logic. He'd never been impulsive. His success had been built on careful calculation. Yet, here he was, making a life-altering claim based on nothing but a child's word and a feeling he couldn't explain. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. Leah stepped back as if physically struck. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere private, Alexander said to the CPS worker, finding his composure. Ms. Martinez, is it? These children will be coming with me. That's not how this works, Mr. Prescott, Lucy Martinez replied, though her voice had softened slightly. I need documentation, verification. You'll have it, Alexander promised. Call my attorney, Richard Holtcomb. He turned to his best man, James, who stood nearby in shocked silence. James, please give Miss Martinez Richard's number and have security escort our guests to the reception area. They should enjoy the dinner, even if the ceremony is postponed. James nodded, springing into action, despite his obvious confusion. Leah remained rooted in place, her expression hardening into something Alexander had never seen before. Postponed, she finally said, her voice low and dangerous. There is no postponement, Alexander, only cancellation. She slipped off her engagement ring, a 5-carat diamond that had belonged to his grandmother, and placed it deliberately on the altar. Without another word, she walked down the aisle, her father and mother hurrying after her. Alexander felt a strange sense of relief watching her go. Then he looked down at Nadia, who stood holding on to his jacket sleeve, and at the baby Jacob in his arms. A wave of panic threatened to overwhelm him. What had he just done? 3 hours later, Alexander sat in his study at home, tie undone, jacket discarded. The wedding guests had long departed, taking with them gossip that would fuel Boston society for months. His attorney, Richard, had worked his magic with CPS, securing temporary custody while paternity tests were arranged. The Baroque grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight. Alexander couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so exhausted or so alive. Nadia sat across from him on an antique leather chair far too large for her small frame, legs dangling, watching him with cautious hope. Jacob had finally fallen asleep in a makeshift bed created from a drawer lined with blankets. The Prescott mansion, for all its luxuries, wasn't equipped for infants. "So, your mother was in Wolf?" Alexander said gently. "She worked for me at the Boston Research Facility about 11 years ago." Nadia nodded. "She was a scientist. She said you were smart, but you worked too hard. A faint smile touched her lips and that you had kind eyes." Alexander felt something twist in his chest. He remembered Anne, brilliant, fierce, unwilling to compromise her ethics. They'd had a brief relationship during the early days of Prescott Pharmaceuticals before success had changed everything, before his mother had made it clear that Wolf wasn't suitable for her son's future. "Why didn't she tell me about you?" he asked quietly. Nadia looked down at her hands. "She said you had important things to do, that you were changing the world with your medicine company." She paused. "And your mama didn't like her." Alexander winced. That much was certainly true. Mary Prescott had made her disapproval of Anne abundantly clear. As if summoned by the thought, the study door opened without a knock. Mary Prescott stood in the doorway, still wearing her mother of the groom outfit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the chaos of the day. "I've sent the staff home," she announced, ignoring Nadia completely. "This situation requires discretion. The press is already circling like vultures." "Mother," Alexander began. "I've called Dr. Forrester," she continued, cutting him off. "He'll be here in the morning to collect DNA samples. We need to verify these claims immediately." "Mother," Alexander said more firmly. "This is Nadia and Wolf's daughter." Mary's eyes flicked dismissively over the child. "So she says." "And the infant?" "Jacob, his son, too," Nadia answered before Alexander could speak, her voice small but defiant. Mary's eyebrows arched. "Children should speak when spoken to," she said coldly. Alexander stood up, surprised by the surge of protective anger he felt. "Mother, this child has just lost her mother. She's exhausted and frightened. We all need rest before we discuss anything further." For the first time in years, Mary looked genuinely surprised by her son's defiance. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "Very well. I've had Agnes prepare the blue guest room. The child can sleep there tonight." She glanced at the sleeping baby. "I've ordered baby supplies to be delivered first thing tomorrow. This house hasn't seen an infant since you were born." With that, she turned and left, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. Nadia waited until the footsteps faded before whispering, "Your mama doesn't like me either." Alexander smiled sadly. "My mother takes time to warm up to people. Don't worry about her." Nadia yawned suddenly, her small shoulders slumping with fatigue. Alexander realized with a pang of guilt that while he'd been managing the chaos of his interrupted wedding, this child had been holding herself together through sheer will. "Let's get you to bed," he said gently. "Things will seem clearer in the morning." But morning brought no clarity, only more complications. Hold on tight, to secrets are about to unravel. Alexander woke to find Mary in the breakfast room with a stack of documents, a grim expression, and news that Leah's father had withdrawn from a crucial business partnership. "The Henderson deal is collapsing," she informed him as he poured coffee. "Charles McConnell called the board members last night. He's suggesting your erratic behavior indicates instability in leadership." Alexander sat down heavily. "Where are the children?" he asked instead of responding to the business crisis. "The infant is with Agnes," Mary replied. "The girl is still sleeping." "Her name is Nadia," Alexander corrected. "And Jacob is not the infant." Mary set down her teacup with careful precision. "Alexander, you need to think clearly. These children appeared out of nowhere with a fantastical story and no proof. Meanwhile, your company, your legacy is at risk. Leah's father is mobilizing against you and the board is concerned." "The DNA test will confirm," Alexander began. "And if it does," Mary interrupted. "What then? You'll suddenly become father to a 10-year-old and an infant?" You know nothing about raising children? You have responsibilities, commitments. Alexander stared at his mother, suddenly seeing her through new eyes. Did you know, he asked quietly, about and being pregnant? Is that why you pushed me to end things with her? Mary's expression flickered. Before she could answer, Agnes appeared at the doorway, her usually calm face distressed. Mr. Prescott, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you need to come quickly. It's the little girl. She's gone, and she's taken the baby with her. Alexander stood so abruptly his chair toppled backward. What do you mean gone? How could she just leave? I checked on the baby half an hour ago, and he was sleeping peacefully, Agnes explained, wringing her hands. I went to prepare his bottle, and when I returned, both children were missing. The back door was open. Alexander felt a chill of fear. A 10-year-old girl and an infant alone in Boston. Where would they go? Why would Nadia run after coming so far to find him? Then he saw it. His mother's briefcase slightly open on the chair beside her. Visible inside was a legal document with the letterhead of Family Court Services. The words "Emergency Custody Petition" were clearly visible. What is that? He demanded, pointing to the document. Mary didn't flinch. A contingency plan. The children need proper care while this situation is sorted out. You were planning to take them away, Alexander realized, fury building inside him. After everything the child has been through, you were going to send her into the system anyway. I was protecting you, Mary replied. Just as I've always done. Alexander stared at his mother, decades of unspoken truths hanging between them. He thought of Anne Wolfe, brilliant and passionate and somehow threatening enough that Mary had orchestrated her removal from his life. He thought of Nadia, brave enough to cross the city alone to fulfill her mother's dying wish. He thought of little Jacob, who might be his son. I need to find them, he said, already moving toward the door. Before something happens to them. Alexander, Mary called after him. Think about what you're doing. Your entire future is at stake. He paused at the doorway, looking back at the woman who had shaped his life, his choices, his company. Maybe it's time I decided what my future should look like, he said quietly. As he rushed to his car, he realized Nadia had left with nothing. No money, no supplies for the baby, not even a coat for the cool spring morning. Where would a frightened 10-year-old go in a city she didn't know? He tried to think like Nadia to understand what she might do. Then it hit him. There was one place in Boston that might mean something to her. One place connected to her mother that Nadia might seek out for safety. He pulled out his phone to call his driver, but before he could dial, it rang with an unknown number. He answered quickly. Mr. Prescott. The voice was vaguely familiar. This is Lucy Martinez from Child Protective Services. I'm at Memorial Hospital. We have Nadia and Jacob Wolfe here. Alexander felt relief wash over him, quickly followed by fresh concern. The hospital? Are they hurt? No, they're physically fine, Ms. Martinez replied. But there's something you should know. The baby has been examined by doctors here and they've made a discovery. What kind of discovery? Alexander asked, a new fear gripping him. The kind that changes everything, she answered. You need to get here immediately. Alexander reached Memorial Hospital in record time, his mind racing with possibilities. What could the doctors have discovered about Jacob? Was the baby ill? Was there some condition and had kept secret? The hospital corridors were sterile and bright, a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings he'd left behind. Lucy Martinez waited for him at the pediatric ward entrance, her expression carefully neutral. Mr. Prescott, she acknowledged. Thank you for coming quickly. Where are they? Alexander asked, dispensing with pleasantries. This way. She led him through double doors into a quieter section of the ward. Nadia brought Jacob in because she was worried about his breathing. She said he'd been wheezing since yesterday. Alexander felt a stab of guilt. In all the chaos, he hadn't noticed the baby was unwell. The doctors examined him and found he has a mild respiratory infection. Common in infants, nothing serious, Ms. Martinez continued. But during the examination, they noticed something else. She stopped outside a room with a large window. Through it, Alexander could see Nadia sitting in a chair next to a hospital crib, reading a book to the baby. The sight stirred something profound within him. Relief, tenderness, and a strange sense of recognition. Nadia came directly here after leaving your house, Ms. Martinez explained. She told the registration nurse that Jacob needed a doctor and that his father would pay for it. A hint of a smile crossed her face. She gave them your name and phone number. Alexander couldn't help smiling despite his worry. The girl had courage. That was certain. What did the doctors find? He asked, bracing himself. Ms. Martinez hesitated. Jacob has a distinctive birthmark on his left shoulder. A small heart-shaped mark. When the doctor mentioned it, Nadia said something interesting. What? She said, you have the same mark in the exact same place. Alexander's hand unconsciously moved to his left shoulder. The birthmark had been there since his birth. A family trait passed down through generations of Prescott men. How would she know that? He whispered. That's what I was hoping you could tell me, Ms. Martinez replied. It's a rather specific detail for a child to invent. Alexander stared through the window at Nadia, who hadn't yet noticed him. She was speaking animatedly to Jacob, who watched her with wide, alert eyes. And must have told her, he said finally. We were close 11 years ago. Close enough that she would know about a birthmark hidden under your clothing. Alexander didn't answer. The implication was clear. I've expedited the DNA tests, Ms. Martinez said. Given the circumstances, we should have results within 48 hours. Alexander nodded, still watching Nadia. May I see them now? Of course, but Mr. Prescott. She placed a hand on his arm, stopping him momentarily. Children form attachments quickly. If you're having doubts about your claim, now would be the time to say so. Alexander met her eyes. I'm not having doubts. He was surprised to realize it was true. Whatever the DNA tests showed, he felt a responsibility toward these children that transcended biology. When he entered the room, Nadia looked up, her expression a mix of defiance and relief. You came, she said simply. Of course I came. Alexander pulled a chair beside her. You had me worried running off like that. Your mother was going to send us away, Nadia said bluntly. I heard her on the phone. She called us a complication. Alexander winced. My mother doesn't always express herself well. She can't send you anywhere. That's not her decision to make. Is it yours? Nadia challenged with a maturity that belied her 10 years. It's ours, Alexander replied carefully. Yours, mine, and what's best for Jacob. Nadia studied him, weighing his words. Jacob was making a funny noise when he breathed, she explained. Mama taught me that's bad for babies. Her voice wavered slightly. She was a doctor for babies before she got sick. Alexander nodded. And had been a pediatric researcher, brilliant and dedicated. Her work on childhood respiratory diseases had first brought her to Prescott Pharmaceuticals. The doctors say Jacob will be fine, he assured her. They're giving him medicine. He paused, then added gently, Nadia, Miss Martinez told me about Jacob's birthmark. Nadia's eyes widened slightly. Mama said, all Prescott men have it. She said that's how she knew for sure Jacob was yours. She looked down at her hands. She showed me a picture of you once from when you were together. Why didn't she tell me about you? Alexander asked the question that had been haunting him since yesterday. Why didn't she let me know I had a daughter and a son? Nadia's eyes filled with tears. She tried. When she found out she was having me, she called your office lots of times. She swallowed hard, but your mother always answered. She told Mama you didn't want to talk to her, that you were engaged to someone else. Alexander felt as though he'd been punched. My mother intercepted her calls. The pieces were falling into place. Just like you did 11 years ago when she tried to tell me about Nadia. After a while, Mama stopped trying, Nadia continued. She said we were fine on our own, that she'd make sure I had everything I needed. A tear slipped down her cheek, but then she got sick. Really sick. And when Jacob came, her voice broke. Alexander reached out hesitantly, then placed his hand over Nadia's small one. I'm so sorry, Nadia. I didn't know. Are you mad at us? She whispered. For ruining your wedding? No, Alexander replied firmly. I'm not mad at all. He considered his next words carefully. I think maybe you saved me from making a mistake. Before Nadia could respond, the door opened and a doctor entered with a tablet in hand. Mr. Prescott, I'm Dr. Bentley, the pediatrician on call. Jacob's responding well to the bronchodilator. We'd like to keep him overnight for observation, but he should be able to go home tomorrow. Thank you, Doctor, Alexander said, relief washing over him. Dr. Bentley smiled at Nadia. You did the right thing bringing him in, young lady. You've got good instincts. Nadia straightened with pride. My mama taught me about babies. Well, she taught you well, Dr. Bentley replied kindly before turning back to Alexander. Mr. Prescott, there are some forms you'll need to fill out at the nurse's station. And some decisions about guardianship that need to be addressed. Alexander understood. Despite his verbal claim of paternity, the legal situation remained uncertain. I'll take care of it right away, he promised, standing up. To Nadia, he added, will you be okay here with Jacob for a few minutes? She nodded solemnly. We're not going anywhere. As Alexander followed Dr. Bentley into the hallway, he was surprised to see James, his best man from the interrupted wedding, striding toward them. Alex, James called, relief evident in his voice. Thank God. I've been trying to reach you. James, what are you doing here? It's your mother, James replied grimly. She's called an emergency board meeting. She's trying to have you removed as CEO on grounds of mental instability. Alexander stared at his friend in disbelief. She can't do that. I control the majority shares. Not anymore, James said, lowering his voice. The Henderson deal included a provisional transfer of voting rights during the transition period. With that deal in jeopardy, those rights are in question. She's using the loophole. Alexander felt his world tilting again. The company I'd built from the ground up, my life's work, was being taken from him by his own mother. When is this meeting? He asked tightly. In 2 hours. At the main office. James glanced toward the hospital room where Nadia sat with Jacob. Alex, what's going on? Everyone's talking about these kids. Leah's father is on the warpath. The press is having a field day. Alexander's mind raced. 2 hours wasn't enough time to secure legal representation, gather his allies on the board, and counter whatever narrative Mary had constructed. I need to make some calls, he said, pulling out his phone. Dr. Bentley, who had been waiting, discreetly, cleared his throat. Mr. Prescott about those guardianship forms. Alexander looked back through the window at Nadia, who was once again reading to Jacob, then at his buzzing phone where notifications of missed calls from board members, business partners, and his attorney were piling up. 2 lives hung in the balance. The children's and his company's, and he couldn't be in 2 places at once. I have to go, he told Dr. Bentley. But I'll be back as soon as possible. The children can't leave without proper authorization, the doctor reminded him. And if no guardian is established by tomorrow, CPS will need to place them temporarily. Alexander felt torn in half. He looked to James. Can you stay here with them? Just until I get back from the board meeting. James hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the request, but nodded. Sure, but Alex, what are you going to do? Alexander didn't have an answer. He'd spent his adult life building Prescott Pharmaceuticals, creating medicines that helped millions. The company wasn't just his legacy. It was his identity. But as he watched Nadia gently stroking Jacob's cheek, he realized that for the first time in his life, something mattered more. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I need to stop my mother before she takes everything." He approached Nadia once more, kneeling beside her chair to meet her at eye level. "Nadia, I have to leave for a little while. There is an emergency at my company, but my friend James will stay with you, and I promise I'll be back as soon as I can." Nadia's eyes filled with fresh worry. "You're coming back, right? You won't leave us here?" The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. This child had already lost her mother and faced abandonment to the foster system. Trust wasn't something she gave easily. "I will come back for you," he promised solemnly. "You have my word." Nadia studied his face, then nodded once. "Okay." As Alexander hurried toward the exit, his phone rang again. This time it was Richard, his attorney. "Alexander, where are you? Mary is gathering the board. She's claiming you've had some kind of breakdown. That these children are part of a delusion." "They're not a delusion, Richard," Alexander interrupted. "They're my children. I'm almost certain of it." There was a pause on the line. "That complicates matters." "How so?" "Because Mary has someone else making a claim," Richard said heavily. "Someone who arrived at the office an hour ago with documentation that could destroy everything, including your relationship with these children." "Who?" Alexander demanded, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "Leah," Richard replied. "And she's not alone. She brought Wolf's sister with her." Alexander stopped in his tracks. "And had no sister." "According to the woman with Leah, she did. And she has papers proving she's Jacob's legal guardian. Papers supposedly signed by Wolf on her deathbed." Alexander's mind raced. And, an only child, had been raised in foster care. She had no family. She'd told him so when they first met, laughing about how they were both orphans in different ways. He'd been raised by a cold, controlling mother. She'd had no parents at all. "It's a lie," he said firmly. "And didn't have a sister." "Well, this woman has a birth certificate, family photos, and guardianship documents that say otherwise," Richard countered. "Alexander, you need to get here now." As Alexander rushed to his car, the hospital receded behind him. He couldn't shake the image of Nadia's trusting face. "I will come back for you," he had promised. But with Mary's machinations and this new threat, he wasn't certain he could keep that promise. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, Alexander Prescott was facing a battle he wasn't sure he could win. The Prescott Pharmaceutical's headquarters towered above Boston's financial district, its glass facade reflecting clouds that had gathered ominously over the city. Alexander entered through the private executive entrance, bypassing the reporters already clustering at the main doors. News traveled fast in Boston society. Richard waited for him in the lobby, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. "They're already in the boardroom," he said without preamble. "Mary has 8 of the 12 board members in her corner." "We only need to sway 2, Alexander replied, straightening his tie. He was still wearing yesterday's wedding clothes, he realized with a distant sort of surprise. "What's this woman claiming to be Anne's sister saying exactly?" "That Wolf legally appointed her as Jacob's guardian before her death," Richard explained as they stepped into the elevator. "She has a notarized document dated 3 days ago, right before Anne died." "Convenient timing," Alexander noted grimly. "And this woman's name, Vanessa Wolf, claims she's been estranged from Anne until recently when Anne reached out knowing her condition was terminal." The elevator doors opened directly into the executive suite. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, Alexander could see his mother standing at the head of the table, her silver hair gleaming under the recessed lighting. Leah sat beside her, elegant and composed, even in the aftermath of their ruined wedding. Next to Leah was a woman Alexander had never seen before. Dark-skinned, expensively dressed, with a superficial resemblance to Anne that might convince someone who hadn't known Anne well. "Ready?" Richard asked. Alexander nodded, though in truth he'd never felt less prepared for a confrontation. As they entered the boardroom, all conversation ceased. Alexander, Mary acknowledged coolly. How good of you to join us, Mother. He took his place at the opposite end of the table. I understand you've called an emergency meeting regarding my mental fitness to lead the company. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. They were mostly older men who'd been with the company since its early days, who'd watched Alexander build Prescott Pharmaceuticals from a small research outfit into a pharmaceutical giant. Your behavior yesterday raised serious concerns, Mary stated. Abandoning your wedding to claim paternity of children you've never met, based solely on the word of a 10-year-old girl. Nadia, Alexander interrupted. Her name is Nadia. Mary continued as if he hadn't spoken. The board has a responsibility to shareholders. Your erratic decisions threaten the stability of this company. I made one personal decision, Alexander countered. It has no bearing on my ability to lead Prescott Pharmaceuticals. The Henderson deal collapsed this morning, board member Jenkins interjected. Charles McConnell withdrew his support. That's a 20-point drop in our stock already. We can recover, Alexander assured him. The McConnell partnership was advantageous, but not essential to our growth strategy. That's not how Charles sees it, Leah spoke up for the first time. Her voice was cool and controlled, but Alexander could see the anger simmering beneath her poised exterior. He believes your judgment is compromised, as do I. Alexander met her gaze. I'm sorry about yesterday, Leah. You deserved better than a public humiliation. But this isn't about us. No, she agreed. It's about those children and your sudden conviction that they're yours, despite evidence to the contrary. She gestured to the woman beside her. This is Vanessa Wolfe, Anne's sister. She has legal custody of Jacob. The woman, Vanessa, nodded solemnly. And I reconnected when she became ill, she explained, her voice soft with practiced grief. She asked me to care for her son after she was gone. Alexander studied her. There was a calculated quality to her performance, a grief too perfect, too measured. And never mentioned having a sister, he said. Not once in all the time I knew her. We were estranged, Vanessa replied smoothly. Our relationship was complicated. So complicated that you have different accents, Alexander noted. Vanessa's speech carried hints of a southern drawl, nothing like Anne's distinctive Chicago inflections. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Vanessa's face before she recovered. I was raised by our grandmother in Georgia after our parents died. And was in foster care from age 7, Alexander countered. She had no living relatives. Perhaps she didn't tell you everything, Mr. Prescott, Vanessa suggested. Her sympathy too practiced to be genuine. Just as you apparently didn't tell your fiancé everything about your past relationships. Several board members exchanged glances. Mary seized the opening. The point, she said firmly, is that this situation demonstrates a concerning pattern of behavior. Alexander, you've been working excessive hours for years. The pressure of the Henderson merger, the wedding preparations. It's understandable that you might experience a lapse in judgment. This isn't a lapse in judgment, Mother, Alexander said through gritted teeth. And this meeting is premature. DNA tests are already underway. In 48 hours, we'll have scientific proof of my relationship to these children. DNA tests can be inconclusive, Vanessa interjected. And they don't override legal guardianship. Alexander turned to Richard. Is that true? If the DNA confirms I'm Jacob's father, does her guardianship still stand? Richard hesitated. It complicates matters. If the guardianship document is authentic and was executed while Anne was of sound mind, it carries significant weight. You would need to petition the court to overwrite it. And what about Nadia? Alexander asked. The guardianship only mentions Jacob, Richard replied. If you're confirmed as Nadia's father, your claim would be stronger. Mary made a dismissive gesture. This is precisely the distraction we're concerned about, Alexander. While you're entangled in custody battles and paternity tests, who's running the company? Who's salvaging the Henderson deal? I am, Alexander stated firmly. I've always separated my personal and professional lives. That won't change. You've never had children before, Mary pointed out. You have no idea how they'll impact your life, your focus, your priorities. The truth of her words stung. Alexander had no experience with fatherhood. No idea what raising 2 children, one of them an infant, would mean for his carefully structured life. We need stability, board member Jenkins added. The markets respond to uncertainty with fear. Your personal situation is creating uncertainty. Alexander looked around the table, reading the faces of people he'd worked with for years. Most wouldn't meet his eyes. Only 2 seemed genuinely conflicted. Dr. Patel, the head of research who had worked closely with him years ago, and Josh Bentley, the youngest board member who had joined just last year. I propose a compromise, Alexander said finally. A temporary leave of absence. 30 days for me to resolve my personal matters and for the company to stabilize. Mary shook her head. Not enough. The board needs to vote on permanent leadership changes. Based on what? Alexander challenged. One personal decision, a paternity claim that hasn't even been verified yet. He turned to the board members directly. You all know my dedication to this company. I built it from nothing. I've delivered record profits for 9 consecutive quarters. A few members nodded reluctantly. 30 days, Alexander repeated. If the company doesn't stabilize by then, I'll voluntarily step down. It was a gamble, but he knew the board's primary concern was financial stability. Give them a month of solid performance and their loyalty would return. Dr. Patel spoke up for the first time. I think that's reasonable. Alexander deserves the opportunity to prove this situation won't affect his leadership. Josh Bentley nodded in agreement. 30 days is standard for personal leave. We can revisit if necessary. Mary's lips thinned with displeasure. She'd clearly expected an easier victory. Very well, she conceded reluctantly. We'll vote on a 30-day leave of absence with Mary as interim CEO, Richard suggested. With Richard as interim CEO, Alexander countered, meeting his mother's outraged stare. To avoid any appearance of conflict of interest. The vote was close, 7-5 in favor of Alexander's proposal. He'd won this round, but barely. As the board members